Alright guys, and welcome to another video. So if you've seen a fair amount of TBC content by now here on YouTube, then you'll probably come across the topic of melee DPS in the Burning Crusade, since many people claim that the meta is going to totally change if Classic TBC launches. From Warriors and Rogues being the top dog DPS class to being the worst, and then Warlocks and Hunters taking over. And today we're going to evaluate just how true that is, because honestly it's really not as bad as people are making out, and I really don't want people to be discouraged so much from playing a melee class that they actually feel under pressure to re-roll. Just before we begin guys, if you like this kind of content and want to see more, please do subscribe to the channel as that really helps out. But anyway, let's get on with it. So the first video I want to draw your attention to is a DPS comparison video of a number of different classes made by Hamster Wheel, a YouTuber who also makes great TBC content. And as you can see, the Rogue in this test averaged 876 DPS in pre-raid gear and 960 in full raiding gear, whereas classes like the Warlock and the Hunter can go over 1500 DPS. Now these tests aren't 100% accurate to a raiding environment where you have to move around and respond to mechanics, and a rogue with years and years of experience and knowledge could probably push the DPS further. However, it goes without telling that ranged do pull ahead over melee DPS. But it isn't all doom and gloom, because in later raid tiers, when melee DPS get better gear, with higher hit and crit rating, they begin to catch up to the ranged DPS. But even then, this test makes the situation look far worse than it really is. I think a lot of people are going to get ahead of themselves a little bit and decide to re-roll from a warrior or a rogue to a warlock when, in my humble opinion, it really isn't necessary. Yes, I understand that a ranged DPS will outmatch a melee DPS on a target dummy with no mechanics, but in a realistic raiding environment, melee DPS can easily take over ranged DPS on a lot of boss fights. I've seen Warriors, Rogues and even Retribution Paladins do insane damage on Gruul, and that's because melee can continue to deal damage when they have to spread for the Shatter debuff, whereas a Warlock will probably have to stop hard casting Shadow Bolt in order to actually survive. And either way, you can't have an entire raid composed of ranged DPS. You have to have a balance of melee and ranged DPS for a balanced raid setup, obviously. Some adds are even immune to magic damage, so only melee can kill them. So what I've decided to do is make a little bit of a survey. I'm going to look at 10 different raiding videos on YouTube and look at what kind of DPS the groups are doing. We're going to be focusing on comparing the Rogue and the Warrior to a Warlock in tier 4 raids like Karazhan and Gruul's Lair, since this is what most people are concerned about. In tier 5 and tier 6 raiding, the gap between ranged and melee DPS is much smaller. Obviously Warlocks and Hunters are still absolute kings of DPS, but Warriors and Rogues can easily out DPS Mages and Elemental Shamans. So let's take a little look at the results. Each line, as you can see here, corresponds with the next line of the class, and it's a comparison of all of those classes within the same raid fight, so they're not taken from different raid fights or anything like that. And as you can see, yes, the Warlock has a few ridiculously high numbers like 1555, 1421, but there's a lot of small numbers there. There's a reason why there's a lot of small numbers there, and it's just simply by the fact that sometimes bosses are difficult for you actually to do loads of DPS on as a Warlock, because you have to move around so much, and that gives the opportunity for melee to massively take over. There's some really high numbers here for Rogues, 1268, 1244, for Warrior you've got 1120, 1175. So the results aren't a perfect science, since we don't know the skill levels or the gear of the people raiding, but what you can see is a lot of randomness. These DPS results were taken from a number of different boss fights, and it's very clear that Rogues and Warriors can do really good DPS if they push themselves, and can even out DPS Warlocks. Obviously, if you put two equally skilled and geared people against each other, the player playing a Warlock will win. But unless you're in a hardcore world first speedrunning guild, you aren't going to have those kind of conditions. If you're very skilled and put a lot of work into your character, you can out DPS Hunters and Warlocks on a number of different boss fights, and at the end of the day you're going to look way more skilled and valuable to a raid if you do. If you're a Warlock and you top the DPS meters, people aren't going to be that impressed or surprised, to be honest. And the reason why I'm trying to depict this issue in a more positive light is because I don't want there to be a growing stigma in the community that rogues and warriors simply are unviable and they suck, and everyone should just re-roll to a warlock or a hunter, because this kind of min-maxing culture is what ultimately ruins the game for a lot of people. This is why a lot of people have quit Classic. In TBC, people have much more freedom to play whatever spec they want, because they are all way more balanced than they were in Classic WoW, and that's just what people should do. Another simple point that needs to be made is how guild raid groups will need a balanced range of different classes so that they can efficiently gear people up, and so that the raid group is future proof for when warriors and rogues start doing bigger DPS. So if you're playing a warrior or a rogue right now, there's no need to, in my opinion, to start panicking and thinking about re-rolling. Unless you genuinely want to try out a different class, then that's fair enough. If you look on the bright side, less people will be playing rogues and warriors, which means you're basically going to have way less competition for when it comes to loot. It's rare that you're going to see two warriors in a single Karazhan group, so any plate DPS gear is going to be yours without any competition, including the two-handed weapons, providing that you're not grouped with a Retribution Paladin. I would actually recommend for warriors to roll arm spec, to be honest, in tier 4 raids. Firstly, because you provide a really good supporting debuff. Secondly, you can get really big, fat two-handed weapons, which are, is obviously faster than waiting around and farming for two different individual single-handed weapons. Plus, you'll be in a more viable PvP spec for when you want to dabble in a little bit of Battlegrounds and Arena. And the same thing applies for a rogue. I would recommend playing as a combat dagger rogue, because there's no other class in the game in TBC that's going to benefit from daggers other than a combat rogue dagger. So that's essentially free loot, because in Classic, it's already people are already recommending Classic for you to roll daggers because a lot of people don't roll on them, and you can get epic weapons very quickly. You're going to get epic weapons even faster on TBC because less people are going to be playing rogues. And then again, like, once you've got those really awesome daggers, you can start using them in Arena and Battlegrounds and just stomp all over everyone. Overall, I just think rogues have an absolutely better time at raiding if they go daggers, because if you want to go swords, you have to farm this weapon called Latro's Shifting Sword and then Latro's Dancing Blade. It's basically a main hand and offhand combo, very similar to Dao Ren's. It's very frustrating to farm from my personal experience because it just never seems to drop and you always seem to get really unlucky. But if you go daggers, you can get a rep reward from Keepers of Time, and it's Bob's your uncle. But anyway guys, that's where I'm going to end the video there. My name is Medigoblin, and until my next video, ciao.